Give her a peck on the lips. I said, "I'll see you in a couple of hours, love." The last thing I said to her. A couple of hours. And now it's 3 months. And she asked me if I'd go over to Dungarvan for her.
Sure.
Yeah, I went to Dungarvan, got the bit of food that she asked me to get from Aldi over there. And then I returned to Youghal. And I opened the front door. And I went through. Normally she'd been in the front room with the pets, watching MTV or something. And she wasn't there.
A grave 1 meter deep, hidden under a staircase in a quiet house in Youghal, County Cork. On the evening of October 11th, 2023, searchers finally break through to what's inside. 6 years and 7 months after a woman vanished from this exact address, she has been found. Not missing, not living somewhere else with a new name, but buried in her own home the entire time. Within hours, word spreads through the small Irish coastal town. The case of Tina Satchwell just became something no one wanted it to be. Quick thing before we go further. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. This case took nearly 8 years to resolve, and the ending is more disturbing than almost anyone in Ireland expected. Let's start from the beginning. Tina Dingavan grew up in Fermoy, County Cork. In the 1980s, still a young woman, she left home in England, moving to live with her grandmother near Leicester. It was there she met a local man named Richard Satchwell. They fell into a relationship, and on Tina's 20th birthday, they married in Oldham, England. Not long after, the couple made their way back to Ireland and settled in Fermoy, Tina's hometown, where they spent years building an ordinary life together. In 2016, they made one more move to a house on Grattan Street in Youghal, a small town on the Cork coastline. People who knew Tina describe her simply: kind, gentle, someone who loved animals and loved the people close to her. In 2017, she was 45 years old, living what looked from the outside like an unremarkable life with her husband of nearly 3 decades.
Tina was our precious sister, cousin, auntie and daughter. Her presence in our life meant so much to us all. We as a family can never put into words the impact of her loss that has had on all of us. Tina was a kind, loving, gentle soul who loved her animals like they loved her, and that's the way we want her remembered. Today,
on March 19th, 2017, the couple was seen together in public at a car boot sale in Carricktuil, about 35 kilometers from home. Nothing about that day stood out. It was the kind of day nobody remembers until they're forced to. Prosecutors would later allege that the next day, March 20th, was the day Tina Satchwell died, but nobody knew that yet. What the public first heard came 4 days later, on 24 March, when Richard Satchwell walked into a police station in Fermoy and reported his wife missing. His story was simple. He said he'd made Tina breakfast that Monday morning and that she'd asked him to drive to a supermarket in Dungarvan. He said that when he got back a couple of hours later, she was gone. No note, no warning, and according to him, no contact from her ever again. At first, police treated it exactly the way it sounded, as a missing person case. People leave difficult marriages. It happens. There was nothing yet to suggest otherwise. But as weeks stretched into months with no sign of Tina, no phone call, no bank withdrawal, no sighting anywhere, the case started to feel less like an adult choosing to disappear and more like something had gone deeply wrong. And Richard Satchwell responded to that growing unease in a way almost nobody in his position does. He didn't withdraw from the spotlight. He stepped into it. Over the next several years, he gave more than a dozen interviews. Reporters sat with him in the front room of the very house he'd shared with Tina, a room just a few steps from the staircase that would later become the center of the entire case. In one of those interviews, filmed in June of 2017, 14 weeks to the day since he said Tina vanished, he described, visibly emotional, how her disappearance was destroying him.
Tina, come home. There's nobody mad at you. My arms are open. This is killing me, Tina, love. Please.
He told a version of the story that barely shifted for 6 years. Tina had left him. Their marriage had broken down. She'd even taken 26,000 euros they supposedly saved in cash, a claim the courts would later determine the couple never had the money to make true in the first place. There was another version of the story too, one he told to a woman named Sarah Dobson at a car boot sale that same spring, while he was selling pieces of Tina's wardrobe. He told her Tina was seriously ill in a hospital in England, that she'd lost a dramatic amount of weight, and that she was staying with her sister while he fixed up their house. Dobson, not knowing any better, joked that Tina would kill him for selling off all her things. She had no way of knowing how impossible that sentence already was. Searches happened over the following years. The family home, the couple's car, the Youghal waterfront, patches of nearby scrubland. Investigators rotated through the case. Public attention rose and fell with each anniversary and appeal, but nothing broke it open. For 4 years, Tina Satchwell remained, officially, a missing woman. Then, in November 2021, everything shifted. A new team from the Cork North and West Division launched a complete review of the file, the kind of quiet decision that rarely makes headlines but can be the difference between a case staying cold forever and finally cracking. Investigators went back through 400 original lines of inquiry. They reviewed 100 hours of CCTV. They reread 170 witness statements, looking for anything the first pass had missed. They found it, buried in small inconsistencies. A story that had shifted just slightly every time it was told again. By early 2022, the senior investigating officer had seen enough to reach a conclusion the public still hadn't been told. She now believed Tina Satchwell wasn't the missing person at all, that she had died through unlawful means, and that the truth about it had been sitting inside that house on Grattan Street for years. What she didn't have yet was proof solid enough to act on. No body, no confession. Just a growing certainty and a husband who'd spent half a decade telling the same story to anyone with a camera, never once changing where he claimed his wife had gone. That was about to change. And when it did, what Richard Satchwell told investigators next would be far more disturbing than anyone had prepared for. If you're finding this story as unsettling as we did putting it together, let us know in the comments. Now let's get into what happened next. By August 2022, behind the scenes, the case had reached a point almost nobody expected it to reach. The senior investigating officer believed she now had grounds to do something no one had dared to do in 5 years. Arrest Richard Satchwell as a suspect in his wife's murder. It would take over a year longer before the public saw the result of that decision. On October 10th, 2023, police made their move. A man in his 50s was arrested in Youghal, and for the first time, officers confirmed publicly that the investigation into Tina Satchwell's disappearance was now a murder inquiry. A search began at the house on Grattan Street, the same front room where Richard Satchwell had once cried in front of television cameras, the same house where he had sold pieces of his missing wife's life to a stranger at a car boot sale. The next evening, at around 8:35 p.m., searchers found what 6 years of appeals and searches had never uncovered. Human remains, buried roughly a meter deep in a space beneath the staircase inside the sitting room. The site was fully excavated the following day. And then, in a twist that seemed to defy everything that had just happened, the man arrested days earlier was released without charge from the Cove police station at 5 that evening. Remains had been found, but for a tense stretch of hours, nobody had actually been charged with anything. The forensic work that followed would take time, but it eventually answered the one question that had haunted Tina's family for over half a decade. Was this truly her? A forensic anthropologist examined the remains and found no fractures anywhere on the skeleton, including the hyoid bone in the neck, a structure that sometimes, though not always, showed damage in strangulation cases. Separately, dental records were compared against the remains. The match was conclusive. 2 days after his initial arrest, Richard Satchwell was arrested again. And this time, according to evidence later given at trial, he gave detectives a story that had nothing to do with the one he told for 6 years. He said Tina came at him with a chisel on the morning of March 20th, 2017. He described holding a dressing gown belt to her neck to defend himself, and said she went limp. He told detectives that there had been no premeditation and that he hadn't called for help out of panic and shame. He said he placed her body on the couch, then kept it in the family freezer for roughly 2 days before burying her under the stairs on March 26th and covering the grave with cement.
I'm sure you're aware that some people are saying that you've had some involvement in the disappearance of Tina. That's tough on you, because you're grieving the loss.
It's very tough. And I took note of what was in the papers and stuff for a start, where I wouldn't go into Fermoy, where I'd spent best part of 30 years thinking that everybody thought that. But then I go to Fermoy, and I've got people walking up, people who know me, who know us as a couple, they know different.
On October 14, 2023, Richard Satchwell, 57 years old at the time, was formally charged with Tina's murder. He was brought under tight security to a special sitting of the district court in County Tipperary and remanded in custody. What followed was a trial that ran for nearly 5 weeks at the Central Criminal Court in Dublin, 23 days inside Courtroom 6, almost 8 years after Tina was last seen alive. Satchwell pleaded not guilty. He told the court he believed Tina had left him to get, in his words, her own back, for a period years earlier when he had left her. The prosecution laid out the story he'd told for 6 years against the physical reality of what had been found beneath his own staircase, and against the very different account he only gave once the remains were already in evidence. After a trial lasting almost 5 weeks, the jury deliberated for 9 hours and 28 minutes. Just after 12:30 on a Friday, the verdict came back. Unanimous. Guilty of murder. Family members wept in the courtroom. Some members of the jury did too. Satchwell, dressed in a navy jumper, showed almost no reaction, placing his head in his hand. Outside the courthouse, Tina's cousin Sarah Howard spoke to the cameras, her voice carrying the weight of 8 years of not knowing. Today, she said, her family finally had justice for Tina.
Tina Satchwell's family burst into tears as the jury's verdict was announced. Richard Satchwell showed no emotion. The portrait he had painted of his wife as a violent, volatile woman who attacked him regularly was not recognised by those who knew Tina and loved her.
During this trial, Tina was portrayed in a way that is not true to who she was. Tina was our precious sister, cousin, auntie and daughter. Her presence in our life meant so much to us all. We as a family can never put into words the impact of her loss that has had on all of us. Tina was a kind, loving, gentle soul who loved her animals like they loved her, and that's the way we want her remembered. Today, as a family, we finally have justice for Tina. In this time, our family would like to ask for privacy to begin our healing.
On June 4, 2025, Richard Satchwell returned to the Central Criminal Court for sentencing. Under Irish law, murder carries one possible sentence, and Mr. Justice Paul McDermott handed it down: life imprisonment. Tina's family gave victim impact statements, describing her using her birth name, Dingavan, and describing who she actually was, not the version of her that had been painted across a 6-year cover story. They called her caring, loyal, and gentle, someone who was never the difficult, violent woman Satchwell had spent years telling people she was. Tina's half-sister Lorraine Howard told the court she would never forgive him for what he'd done, and said the thought of how Tina had been buried, wrapped in plastic under her own home, still sent a chill through her every time she thought about it. Sarah Howard told the court that no sentence could ever be enough for the man who took her aunt's life, and that he'd shown their family dog more respect in death than he'd shown Tina. Even after the conviction, the story wasn't fully finished. In the days that followed the sentencing, Ireland's political class began asking hard questions, not about Richard Satchwell, but about the system that took 6 years to catch him. Opposition politicians pointed out that it wasn't until a new senior investigator took over the case in 2021 that any real momentum returned to it. 4 years after Tina vanished, 4 years in which her family lived without answers while her killer gave television interviews from the room next to her grave. Some called for a formal review of whether the original investigation had failed her. Ireland's police commissioner, just days after sentencing, confirmed that the original handling of the case would now be examined.
We are thankful that this investigation has provided answers and a sense of justice for Tina's family and the wider community. While no resolution can erase the pain of loss, we sincerely hope that the conclusion of this case brings some measure of comfort to Tina's family. We extend our deepest gratitude to the witnesses in this case and all of those who assisted us throughout the investigation.
Before we close this out, subscribe. Share this video if you think Tina deserves to be remembered by a single headline. And tell us in the comments, what's the biggest question this case left you with? In the end, this case isn't really about a grave under a staircase or a story that took years to unravel. It's about the 6.5 years Tina Satchwell's family spent not knowing, grieving something they weren't even allowed to name yet, while the one person who had the answer chose, deliberately, again and again, not to give it to them. Tina Satchwell was a real woman who loved her family and her animals and deserved a life far longer than the one she got. Her case is a quiet, painful reminder that the truth doesn't always come quickly, but it very rarely stays buried forever.